the strongest case that O'Brien has is for the first meeting, right? But the more he does that, the weaker his case gets that this is just in pursuit of fairness, especially when you consider that Trump has been president before and we have a record that we can just look at. There is more and more controversy about Sean O'Brien's continuous meetings with Donald Trump. I think they've had 2, and now there's going to be a 3rd on the 31st of next week. And for this one, there were apparently whispers of some General Executive Board members, or at least one, saying that they were not going to be attending this meeting with Donald Trump. I don't know the status of attendance at the other meetings with Donald Trump, not sure, but apparently Sean O'Brien sent a memo to all members of the General Executive Board saying that it was mandatory for them to come. And this really rankled the feathers of John Palmer. He is a vice president at large on the General Executive Board for the Teamsters International Union. He is a TDU leader, a longtime TDU leader. He has not been afraid of controversy. One of the more, I think one of the more militant leaders of the TDU. And so he responded with his own letter about to Sean O'Brien, and that has been made public. And that is, and so here's a little snippet of what he said. He said that I write in response to your memo dated January 24th, 2024, demanding that I attend a GEB meeting for the purpose of hearing from former President Donald J. Trump, who has been indicted on 91 felony charges. He is a known union buster, scab, and insurrectionist. I refuse to attend that meeting, which violates the clear language of the international Constitution. And so here's where he quotes from the Constitution, where he makes his constitutional case against the meeting with Donald Trump. He says, in accordance with Article 2, Section 3, Paragraph A, which states the following, quote, no person who knowingly associates, as that term has been defined in prior decisions or disciplinary charges under Article 19, no person who knowingly associates with any member or associate of organized crime families or other criminal groups, or who actively advocates the overthrow of a federal, state, or provincial government by force or violence. Or, so there's this one type of person, right? This person who associates with members or associates of organized crime families or people who want to overthrow the government. Or people who are actually members of these groups, or is a member of any party or group and knows of and actively its purpose to overthrow a federal, state, or provincial government by force or violence shall be allowed to hold membership in the International Union or any of its subordinate bodies. So there's actually a pretty broad prohibition here, not only against being a member of an insurrectionary group or being an insurrectionist yourself, but also associating with such a person. Associating with such a person or group under Palmer's reading of the International Constitution of the Teamsters could be subject for not only discipline, but expulsion from the Teamsters. So, that's a very, very strong, very strong charge there from Palmer. A very strong response to O'Brien's demand that Palmer and other GEB members attend this meeting with Trump. And so in his letter, Palmer continues, given this language and the appalling record of Trump appointing union busters to the Department of Labor, NLRB, and United States Postal Service, his scabbing of an IATSE picket line, and his refusal to act on the Butch-Lewis Act on behalf of tens of thousands of pensioners across America, this meeting should not occur. Your private meeting with Trump, accompanied by the widely circulated thumbs-up photo, appears as a tacit endorsement while it leaves the membership out of the loop. This private backdoor decision will divide the union and weaken it at a time when we need to fight corporate America and their union busters. During the UAW strike, he chose to meet with non-union workers and attacked the UAW and its leadership. Joe Biden went to the picket line. I will be more than happy to meet with Joe Biden on this date and echo the sentiments of UAW President Shawn Fain in his full-throated endorsement of President Joe Biden. As a United States Army veteran, I cannot support a draft dodger and traitor who deliberately undermines the Constitution of the United States. We should never entertain dialogue with a candidate with such an anti-union record. Finally, you, sir, do not have the constitutional authority to, quote, require that I participate in a meeting with this reprehensible individual any more than you could, quote, require that I meet with an organized crime figure. I look forward to meeting President Biden in the afternoon of the 31st. So, yeah, I mean, very strong language there from Palmer, and you know, I mean, a pretty strong constitutional case against the meeting with Trump as well. So, like I said, that continues to be a controversy online amongst Teamsters and people in the labor movement that are on the left. And so we'll continue to keep an eye on it. And it's just, I mean, you know, I think that most of the most common understanding is that all of these meetings by Sean Fain with President Trump are performative. I think that most people do not believe that Sean O'Brien will endorse Donald Trump, because such a thing would be unthinkable. Especially after, you know, Palmer mentions the Butch-Lewis Act. The Butch-Lewis Act saved several union pension funds with $81 billion, and the biggest single beneficiary of it was the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, right? So it's kind of unthinkable that the Teamsters do anything other than endorse Joe Biden. And yet, O'Brien continues to make a show of these meetings with Trump. And so it's unclear to what end he continues to do this. You know, I mean, even, you know, I think that the case becomes less strong the more often you meet with him, right? You know, I mean, the strongest case that O'Brien has is for the first meeting, right? And you can say, like, okay, I did the meeting, and what do you know? He's bad, right? But the more he does that, the weaker his case gets, that this is just in pursuit of, you know, fairness and vetting and all of this stuff, especially when you consider that Trump has been president before and we have a record that we can just look at instead of interviewing him and talking to him. And so, you know, we'll continue to keep an eye on this and see what happens. But, I mean, it would just be kind of appalling if they actually do endorse Trump. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Do you have any thoughts on that, Adam?
Well, I want to point out, Jose in the chat mentioned that Teamsters Mobilize have a petition out about this issue. So, you know, there's a lot of conversation going on among members. You know, Jose was asking about TDU, and, you know, he doesn't believe TDU will say anything about it. It will be interesting to see,
especially with TDU having a prominent leader now speaking out about it. I think the pressure is with Palmer's statement being made public. I think you would think the pressure would be building among TDU members to come out with some sort of statement about this, but I don't know.
Right. And, you know, it's tough, right? It's a tough situation when there's disagreements within your own union, right? And it can be difficult to maintain relationships, right? When you're dealing with those kind of disagreements.
Right.
Let's see, Scott in the chat says, I don't think labor should be political. However, I do think we should support people who support workers. And I get that. You know, I understand that issue. I also see, I see different sides to that, really. In some senses, the ways that our unions are political is not necessarily very effective.
Right.
So me personally, I'm not a big fan of, you know, the large amounts of money that are just kind of dumped into the hands of Democratic candidates. I just don't think that's a very effective use of funds.
Right.
And I don't know that has proven to get us a whole lot of results.
Right.
You know, especially given the quality of some of these candidates, the quality of some of the campaigns. Yeah. So I think there's a lot you could discuss about how political our unions are, like how they engage in that politics.
Right.
You know, should your union, never work with a Republican, right? That's something that's going to come up. And I think it certainly depends on the circumstances, right? You have to look at where are they on our issues. In the case of Trump, like, it's very obvious where he is on the issues. So, like, you don't have to guess at that. At the end of the day, like, politics is a reflection of what's happening in our society. And so, whether you care about politics, politics cares about you, and it's happening to you. And, so that's why I think it's important that we be engaged in it. It's just, how we do that is up for debate, of course.
Right. Will in the chat makes a good point, and basically, I was gonna say this on unions shouldn't be political. Everything is politics, and trade unionists need to be talking about issues inside of work and outside in the political world, and that political world, and that's exactly. I think that's exactly right. I think, Adam, that the way that unions participate in politics is sometimes destructive or at least not helpful, but that unions participate in politics, right, I think is good, because the justification for unionism is basically that workers should have more control. And so all unions getting involved in politics is expanding the quest for worker control into the civil, social, and political realm outside of the workplace. And I think that in and of itself, for workers to have more power and influence in the civil, social, and political world would be an unmitigated good. How our unions currently go about practicing politics, that is something that I am more critical of. But right. But just should unions do politics? The answer to that question, I think, is obviously yes.
I think so too. Yeah. Because it's just your influence is going to be limited outside of that, and ultimately, I think the long-term goal here should be building a working class movement and building our power as working class people. And that should be the direction of your politics. Like, is it aimed in that direction? Is it serving that ultimate goal, to build a working class movement like we had in the 1930s? And to have that kind of power where we can actually win real demands. I think should be the end goal here. So anyway, that's my thoughts about it. I know there's a lot of internal debates that folks in the Teamsters are going to have about this approach and, what they ultimately do. In terms of the endorsement of Biden, I feel a lot like Notary. Some comments we got at the very beginning of the episode that, kind of saw it coming eventually. It's kind of, not only is it sort of expected, it is ultimately, the least bad choice probably on the table. Right. The timing of it, the dissonance, of calling for a ceasefire and then turning around and endorsing, that's difficult. Absolutely. And I felt the same way at the AFL-CIO MLK conference, and I talked about that a week or two ago. Here was all this, rousing rhetoric about civil rights and human rights and the connection to labor rights and the legacy of Dr. King, and not a word about Palestine, and not a word about the 26,000 people who are dead. Right. Who've been killed. And so, it's really tough. It's really tough. But William had a comment that capitalism and democracy don't mix. We should never work with any party that represents capitalism and the bosses. And I'm sensitive to that. I agree with the first part, that a capitalist society is never going to be a truly democratic society because of the inherent inequality of power. Right. In terms of, do we work with parties? I really struggle with that a lot, and I don't know that there is a right answer all the time, necessarily. I think it may depend on the situation and whether it's a local, state, national level, where you're at, where your power lies, like what kind of influence you bring to bear. So I think that's a complicated one, but I'm definitely sympathetic to to that, and that's really my gut instinct, is that, you know, they're not for us. Like, the Democratic Party is not a working class party, right? And so whether you endorse Biden as your tactical decision for 2024, whether you work with them on certain issues, I think is a different story, right? Like, I'm willing to work with Republicans if they're willing to do something good for workers, right? You know, if a Republican in the legislature is willing to sponsor a bill that helps working people, well, hell yeah. Still going to disagree with, 99% of everything else you do. But if we can accomplish something that moves the ball down the field and actually, does provide material impacts for working people, I'm all about that.
Right.
And so to the extent that we can get those kind of wins from Democrats, that's great. But yeah, I just don't necessarily, I don't know. I certainly have no loyalty to the Democratic Party. Nor do I think working people should, because the Democratic Party has no loyalty to working people. If we use them to our advantage, then great. Know that they're always trying to use us to their advantage. So, that's the relationship.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Just kind of checking out some of the comments here as we wrap up. JC Luna says, should unions do politics? In some ways, you're correct regarding presidential elections. Specifically, the popular vote has no say in who gets in office. It's the Electoral College. Our voice is null. As an Alabamian, I can only say that I 100% feel that, because my vote will not matter. Whether I write in Nick Saban, whether I vote for Trump or Biden, whether Cornel West or a Green Party candidate's on the ballot, it literally will make no difference what I do in November. And so, honestly... But
the UAW's endorsement matters, especially because they have a lot of weight in swing states like Michigan.
Yes, I agree. I 100% agree. So, like, there's also something, to add to the dynamic is, like, there's your personal choice, and then there's, like, how you feel about the strategy of organizations and larger forces, and what other people should do. And of course, people love to tell other people what they should do when it comes to voting. And I am very, cynical about that because, like a lot of folks on the left, I've experienced people, blaming me for Trump, in 2016 or, that really is bizarre, because I live in Alabama and Trump won Alabama by over 20 points. So yeah, for a lot of people, I won't say most, but a lot of people in this country, their personal choice in November will mean very little. And so should you go vote? Yeah, I say go vote, especially if it won't take you much time, which it probably won't. If you can vote, you should go vote. But at the end of the day, like, there's so much more we should be doing and organizing in the workplace, building community coalitions, building our power inside and outside the workplace, expanding our networks, educating each other, agitating and organizing. Like, that's really, where we should direct most of our energy, and just engage in electoral politics on a, tactical basis. But anyway, that's about all I want to say on electoral politics for a while, because I really don't care about it that much, frankly.
We do have we've got one call, and we're coming up on the end of the show, so we'll make this one quick. And I think I know who this is, from a 256 area code. Joe, what's on your mind?
Hey, Jacob.
Hey, Joe.
Sean O'Brien, I don't understand what his thinking is by meeting with Donald Trump. You hit the nail on the head when you say that he had a 4-year term. We can see where he stands, and to use the excuse of vetting a candidate just don't make sense to me. But that ain't really what I wanted to talk about, and this will be quick. I just wanted to mention the execution in Alabama this week. And Meemaw Ivy's statement made after the execution was, we have, I ain't quoting her, but her statement was, we've carried out a humane execution. Now, does them two words go together?
Right.
Right.
There's no such thing as a humane execution. She'd been better served just to say that Alabama carried out an execution. And then Steve Marshall weighed in on it, defending it, and he basically wanted to say that the family got justice in the matter. And maybe true enough, but you got to let the family say whether that is true or not. Not a statement from the Attorney General, but the thing I find ironic about it, the family, the family was complicit with the murder in the first place. The preacher husband hired the hitman that killed his wife. So don't weigh the family in with that situation when the family created the thing in the first place. But that's all I got to say. Y'all have a good day.
Hey, appreciate you, Joe. And I'm glad you brought that up. For those of you outside Alabama who may not be aware, the state of Alabama carried out an experimental execution this week. They used nitrogen gas, which had never been used to execute people before in this country. I'm not sure if any other country has ever done it. It has been denounced by the United Nations and many other countries as well. It's yet another disgrace for Alabama. Last thing on the comments, there's a lot of great discussion today. I really appreciate that. JC Luna talks about building infrastructure and building cooperatives, and I totally agree with that. I think you have to operate on as many fronts as possible, and so we need people building co-ops and building community land trust and getting land and resources into the hands of regular everyday people. We need people unionizing in the workplace. We do need people working in policy spaces and in political spaces. We need people organizing in the community and organizing tenants, right? And students everywhere. We have to be organizing everywhere. Right. And I think some people make the mistake of focusing entirely on politics. And then our natural reaction among some of us is to say, well, to hell with all of that, right? And this have nothing to do with it. But I just say let's organize everywhere, and wherever you fit in, wherever you have talents, wherever you feel comfortable and you're passionate, at the end of the day, there's stuff that every one of us can do to try to make this world a better place and try to build a working class movement that can really transform things, because we need it. You mentioned earlier, you're concerned about the state of the country. I think, anyone paying attention is concerned.
Right.
And should be concerned.
Well, and I was going to call back to that, talking about the execution, because much like the rhetoric around immigration has been getting worse and more, wicked and xenophobic,
more
and all of this, and bloodthirsty. Yeah, the rhetoric around the execution was the same. I think the only proper, I grew up in a conservative household, and so I can still, in a lot of ways, see how people believe certain things. And I can understand how a person would believe that for justice to happen, it would be necessary to carry out an execution. I no longer agree with that, obviously. I think that's wrong. But I understand that there are people that have that perspective. But the people that I grew up around with that perspective, it was always somber, and it was not gleeful and bloodthirsty. To the extent that I had conversations with people about the death penalty, it was this is a difficult thing that we have to do to carry out justice and should be treated thusly, right? And it is absolutely concerning to me, again, for the state of the country, and for the state of the world, that the bloodthirsty rhetoric is pervading so many avenues of our political discourse, as it relates to immigration, and then as it relates to the execution of Kenny Smith with an experimental, with a new and experimental form of execution that is, by witness accounts, the most violent execution in decades in the state of Alabama. And yeah, I mean, the rhetoric is just really, I mean, it's been really just
it's disturbing.
It's been disturbing,
and and a lot of it's coming from self-professed pro-life Christians,
right?
And particularly down here in Alabama. I can't say what's happening in California. Those of you out that way, but down here, for sure, it's a lot of pro-life Christians, people who call themselves that, and it's sickening. It really is, and there's a hatred and bigotry that is out there, and we have to combat that. I mean, solidarity is the only way we combat bigotry and the hatred that's out there. I mean, to me, that's the only way we get through it is we try to have solidarity with one another and look out for one another, recognize that we're not better than anybody else. No one else is better than us. Like, that's, and we have to build a mass working class movement and include everybody and not allow ourselves to be divided by nationality or ethnicity, immigration status, gender, sexuality, all these other ways in which, the bosses and the politicians try to divide us. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks out there, who fall into this and who buy into this crap. And then there's the billions of dollars that are spent, pumping this propaganda out to people. Mm-hmm. And it works on some of them. We've got people out there who are consuming this stuff for hours and hours and hours a day, just hearing vile stuff about their fellow human beings. I mean, I think it's a spiritual and moral crisis. Yeah. Truthfully. And I am a very materialist oriented kind of guy and try to think about politics from that perspective. But there is something just deeper even than that, I think, going on. And so, not to end on that somber note, the hopeful thing is, I think there are so many instances of people building people power, and it's happening all over. And I think the more we do that, the more we come together, the more we fight for our common interest and start to win for each other. I think that really is going to make a difference. And like Scott says in the chat, solidarity leads to more empathy, and I 100% agree with that.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.